Hello there, and welcome. Tonight we're going on a special journey together, a journey that takes us back through time to a place that has captured human imagination for thousands of years. A place where sand meets sky, where mighty rivers flow through endless deserts, and where people built wonders that still stand today. Tonight we're traveling to ancient Egypt. Every grain of sand in that ancient land holds a story. Some of these stories we know well. Others are still waiting beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered by future explorers and archaeologists. Tonight, we will step inside that world together. We will explore the glitter of golden treasures and the quiet shadows cast by enormous stone monuments. We will visit lost cities that lie buried beneath desert sands and learn about the stars that guided ancient travelers and rulers. Now, let your mind settle. Let the concerns of the day fade into the background. Tonight, you are not here. You are there, standing on warm sand, watching the sun set over ancient stone temples. You can almost feel the evening breeze carrying the scent of the river. You can almost hear the distant sounds of a civilization that once filled this landscape with life, with purpose, with meaning. Let yourself drift. Let yourself wonder. Let yourself travel back through the centuries to a time when the world was different, yet in so many ways, exactly the same. People loved, people worked, people dreamed of something beyond themselves, something eternal. Now let us begin. Fact 1. The process of preserving a body for the afterlife could take up to 70 days. This was not a quick or simple task. It was a sacred procedure that required great skill, patience, and reverence. The ancient Egyptians believed that the physical body needed to be preserved perfectly so that the soul could recognize it and return to it in the afterlife. Without a preserved body, they thought the soul would wander forever, lost and incomplete. The first step in this long process was to remove the internal organs, which would decay quickly if left inside. These organs were cleaned, treated, and stored separately in special containers. The body cavity was then thoroughly cleaned and packed with materials to help it keep its shape. After this, the entire body was covered with a natural salt called natron, which drew out all the moisture like a sponge absorbing water. This drying stage could last 40 days or even longer, depending on the size of the person and the climate conditions. Once the body was completely dry and no longer at risk of decay, it was carefully washed and anointed with fragrant oils and resins. Then came the wrapping stage, where the body was wound in layer after layer of fine linen strips. Sometimes protective charms were placed between the layers of cloth. Throughout this entire process, priests would recite prayers and perform rituals, calling upon divine powers to protect and guide the deceased. Every step reflected the deep belief that the body was the eternal home of the soul. Fact 2. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heart was the center of all thought and emotion. This is very different from what we understand today. We know now that the brain controls our thinking, our memories, and our feelings. But the ancient Egyptians saw things differently. To them, the heart was everything. It was the seat of intelligence, the source of emotion, the keeper of memory. They believed the heart held a person's entire character, their intentions, their moral worth. In life, the heart connected the physical body with the spiritual self. In death, it played the most crucial role of all, in determining what would happen to the soul. During the preservation process, all the internal organs were carefully removed from the body except for one. The heart was left inside, or if it was damaged during the removal of other organs, it would be replaced with a special charm shaped like a heart. To lose your heart in the afterlife was to lose your very identity, your very self. This belief shaped everything in their culture, from their medicine to their religion to their understanding of what made a person who they were. The heart was revered, protected, and seen as the most important part of the human body. Fact 3. In contrast to how carefully they treated the heart, the ancient Egyptians removed the brain and threw it away because they thought it was completely useless. They believed it served no purpose in thought or memory. All of those functions belonged to the heart. During the preservation process, embalmers would remove the brain through the nose using long-hooked tools. Sometimes they would break up the brain tissue first to make it easier to extract. Other times, they would partially liquefy it before removal. Once the brain was gone, They would rinse out the skull cavity and fill it with resin or linen to help the head maintain its proper shape. This practice was so consistent across time that very few preserved bodies have been found with their brains still intact. Looking back now, we can see the irony. By discarding the brain, the ancient Egyptians unknowingly threw away something that could have told modern scientists so much about ancient diseases, diet, and health conditions. Yet to them, keeping the brain would have seemed pointless. What mattered was preserving the heart, maintaining the body's outward form, and providing all the spiritual protections needed for eternal existence. Fact 4. In the Hall of Two Truths, every person who died faced the most important test of their entire existence. This was called the weighing of the heart. The jackal-headed divine being Anubis would take the heart and place it carefully on one side of a great scale. On the other side, he would place a single feather. This was not just any feather. It was the feather of Mat, representing truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, it meant the person had lived a good and honest life. Their soul would be declared pure and they would be allowed to enter a paradise called the Field of Reeds, a place of eternal abundance and peace. But if the heart was heavier than the feather, weighed down by wrongdoing and dishonesty, something terrible would happen. A fearsome creature named Amit would devour the heart completely. This creature was part lion, part crocodile, and part hippopotamus. When Amit consumed a heart, that soul would cease to exist entirely. There would be no afterlife, no paradise, no continuation, just absolute annihilation. This scene appears in countless tombs and ancient texts, showing how central this belief was to Egyptian culture. It was a powerful reminder to live in harmony with the principles of truth and justice. Fact 5. During the weighing of the heart ceremony, another divine being was present to record everything that happened. This was Thoth, who appeared either as a man with the head of an ibis bird or sometimes as a baboon. Thoth was the keeper of divine knowledge and the master of writing. He stood ready with his writing materials to document the outcome of each judgment. His presence guaranteed that the process would be fair and just, because he was the very embodiment of truth and wisdom. If the deceased person passed the test successfully, Thoth would write down this result and his written record would secure their place in eternity forever. If they failed the test, his record would confirm their fate with equal certainty. To the ancient Egyptians, this act of writing was far more than simple documentation. It was a divine seal, a final and unchangeable truth that was inscribed into the very fabric of the universe itself. Nothing could alter what Thoth had written. His words carried absolute authority and permanence. Fact 6. Something surprising appears in many tomb paintings. The deceased person is shown sitting before a game board, often appearing to play against an opponent we cannot see. The game was usually called Senet, which was very popular among living Egyptians. But showing someone playing this game in their tomb was more than just a pleasant memory of leisure time. The game board had deeper symbolic meaning. Each square on the board represented a different stage of the soul's journey through the afterlife. Some squares were favourable and helpful, others were dangerous and needed to be avoided. Winning the game meant successfully navigating all the challenges and arriving safely in paradise. By showing themselves in the middle of a game, the tomb owner was expressing confidence in their ability to overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead in the afterlife. Perhaps it also expressed a hope that even in eternity there would be time for play, for enjoyment, for the simple pleasures that made life worth living. Fact 7. The very first pyramid was built for a ruler who was not yet called by the title we know today. Long before the word pharaoh became the standard title for Egypt's rulers, a king named Djoser commissioned something that had never been seen before. This was around the year 2670 before the Common Era. A brilliant architect named Imhotep designed this revolutionary structure. Until that time, rulers had been buried in flat-roofed buildings called mastabas. These were essentially rectangular structures made of mud brick or stone. But Imhotep had a different vision. He took the concept of the mastaba and stacked them in layers, creating a series of terraces that rose step by step toward the sky. The result was the step pyramid at Saqqara, and it marked a complete turning point in architectural history. This was not just a tomb, it was a declaration to the world that Egypt's rulers were divine, that their power was eternal, that they belonged among the heavens. Though it is smaller and rougher in appearance than the later smooth-sided pyramids at Giza, Djoser's stepped creation still stands today, more than 4,500 years after it was built. It remains a weathered but unmistakable statement of ambition and innovation that started a tradition lasting for centuries. Fact 8. Ancient Egyptian temples were understood as the literal dwelling places of divine beings themselves. This is very different from how many people think of religious buildings today. These temples were not places where large groups of people gathered to worship together. Instead, they were seen as actual houses where divine beings lived. The innermost chamber of each temple, called the sanctuary, contained a statue of the divine being. This statue was not treated as a mere representation or symbol. It was treated as if it were truly alive. Priests would tend to it every single day, following careful rituals. They would wash the statue, dress it in fine linen clothing, and present offerings of food and incense. Ordinary people were not allowed to enter these sacred inner rooms. Their only contact with the divine presence came during special festivals, when the statue might be carried outside on a ceremonial boat or platform. The temple itself was designed as a symbolic journey. Each room led deeper and deeper toward the divine presence, and each was decorated with scenes of creation and mythology. Even the overall layout was meaningful. The outer courtyards represented the human realm, the world of everyday life. The inner halls represented the heavens and the realm of the divine. And the sanctuary itself was the place where the divine being truly resided in physical form. Fact 9. The pyramids we see today look rough and weathered, with their inner stones exposed to the elements. But when they were first completed, they looked completely different. Each pyramid was originally covered in smooth, polished limestone casing stones that fit together so precisely there was barely any gap between them. These white stones reflected the intense sunlight so brilliantly that the pyramids could be seen from many miles away. Ancient written accounts suggest that the Great Pyramid shone like a precious jewel under the midday sun. It must have been a dazzling beacon visible to travellers crossing the desert from great distances. Over thousands of years, earthquakes loosened many of these casing stones. Later builders, needing materials for new construction projects, took these fallen stones and reused them elsewhere. Only a few of the original casing stones remain today, mostly near the base of the Great Pyramid, offering us just a small glimpse of what the original perfection must have looked like. Imagine standing in the Nile Valley 4,000 years ago and watching the sunlight blaze from a geometric mountain of brilliant white stone. It would have been a sight designed not only to impress living visitors, but also to create a shining pathway to guide the soul of the ruler upward, to join the divine powers in the sky. Fact 10. The Great Sphinx of Giza, that enormous lion with a human head, appears today to be the same sandy colour as the surrounding desert. But evidence suggests it once looked very different. Traces of red pigment have been found on its face, which tells us the Sphinx may have been painted in vivid, bright colours. Imagine a red face, perhaps a blue or yellow headdress, and eyes outlined with dark pigment like the makeup ancient Egyptians wore. In the blazing Egyptian sun, this colossal guardian would have been a striking and almost otherworldly figure, half lion, half human, and completely alive with colour and visual impact. Over thousands of years, wind and sand gradually stripped away the painted surface, leaving behind only the weathered limestone we see today. Yet imagining the Sphinx in its original painted form completely transforms our mental image. Instead of a silent ancient ruin that blends into the desert landscape, it becomes a vibrant guardian actively watching over the pyramids, gazing eternally toward the rising sun with eyes that once gleamed with painted life. Fact 11. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is aligned to true north with remarkable precision. The accuracy is less than 1/20th of a single degree. This is an achievement that baffles modern researchers and engineers. How did ancient builders accomplish this without modern instruments, without compasses, without any of the technology we rely on today? They achieved this precision through careful observation of the stars. One theory suggests that ancient surveyors tracked the rotation of certain stars across the night sky, marking the exact moment when these stars aligned vertically to establish their north-south orientation. Over the vast base of the pyramid, which measures more than 700 feet on each side, even a tiny error in alignment would have created a visible skew in the finished structure. Yet the builders achieved near-perfect accuracy. This alignment may have held deep symbolic meaning as well. The pyramid was not just a tomb in their view, it was a cosmic machine, firmly rooted to the earth yet in perfect conversation with the heavens above. The precision demonstrates not only technical skill, but also the importance they placed on connecting earthly structures with celestial patterns. Fact 12. The ancient Egyptians developed their entire calendar system based on the rising of a single star. The flooding of the Nile River governed Egypt's agricultural cycles, and predicting when that flood would occur was literally a matter of survival for the entire civilization. The key to prediction lay in careful observation of the star we call Sirius. Each year, just before dawn in midsummer, Sirius would appear above the eastern horizon for the first time after being invisible for months. This event is called the heliacal rising. Almost without fail, this appearance of Sirius occurred just shortly before the Nile would begin to swell with floodwaters. The Egyptians built a 365-day calendar around this celestial event. They divided their year into 3 seasons, each lasting 4 months of 30 days. The 3 seasons were named inundation, growth, and harvest, reflecting the agricultural cycle. 5 extra days were added at the end of the year for festivals, which were thought of as the birthdays of divine beings. This calendar, based on Sirius, was so accurate that it drifted only very slowly over the passage of centuries. It stands as remarkable evidence of Egyptian skill in blending careful astronomical observation with the practical needs of daily life. Fact 13. Hieroglyphic writing emerged in Egypt around the year 3200 before the Common Era. This makes it one of the earliest writing systems in the entire world. It was not a simple system to learn or use. Hieroglyphs combined different types of symbols in complex ways. Some symbols represented sounds, like letters in our alphabet. Other symbols stood for entire words. Still other symbols represented abstract ideas and concepts. This flexibility allowed for extraordinary expression and creativity. The writing system was initially used for monumental inscriptions carved into temples, tombs, and upright stone slabs called stelae. These inscriptions conveyed both practical information and spiritual messages. The act of writing itself was considered to have powerful qualities. Making words permanent in stone was a way of making them live forever. Young men who trained as scribes held positions of high respect in society because they alone possessed the knowledge to unlock this sacred skill. Over time, the formal hieroglyphic script evolved alongside other, more cursive styles used for everyday writing on papyrus. But the beauty of the carefully carved hieroglyphic symbols endured for thousands of years. Each carved or painted sign was simultaneously a picture, a sound, and a carrier of meaning across the vast expanse of time. Fact 14. The hieroglyphic writing system was remarkably complex because different symbols served completely different functions. Some signs represented single consonant sounds, functioning somewhat like letters in an alphabet. Others stood for combinations of 2 or 3 consonant sounds. Still others symbolized entire concepts, objects, or ideas without representing any sound at all. For example, a picture of a sun disk might be read as the word meaning sun, or it might represent the concept of day, or it might even stand for a divine name depending on the context and the other symbols around it. This multi-layered system allowed for rich depths of meaning and wordplay. A person's name could be spelled out phonetically using sound signs, illustrated symbolically with picture signs, and then reinforced with a special sign called a determinative that clarified which category of thing was being discussed. To read and write hieroglyphs fluently, a person had to master hundreds of these different symbols and understand the subtle rules for how they combined and interacted with each other. This complexity made literacy quite rare, reserved primarily for professional scribes and priests who spent years in training. But this same complexity also made Egyptian texts far more than simple writing. They were simultaneously art, language, and layered symbolism all woven together. Fact 15. In ancient Egypt, the roles of priest and astronomer were deeply intertwined. Religious leaders observed the movements of the sun, moon, and stars not merely out of curiosity, but because these observations were essential for proper religious practice. Priests needed to determine the precise timing of rituals and ceremonies. Many temples were deliberately aligned to reflect celestial events, such as solstices or the rising of particular stars, ensuring that sacred ceremonies happened at exactly the right cosmic moment. Certain patterns of stars visible in the night sky were associated with specific divine beings. The night sky itself was imagined as a divine presence arching protectively over the earth. The astronomical skills of the priests served practical purposes as well. Their knowledge aided navigation along the Nile River and helped predict the crucial annual flood that brought fertility to the land. This knowledge was carefully guarded within temple walls, passed down from one generation of priests to the next. It reinforced the important connection between the heavens, the divine realm, and the ruler's responsibility to maintain cosmic order on Earth. Fact 16. The ancient Egyptians had profound concepts of eternity, and they created specific words to express different aspects of forever. One of their most important words was jet, which referred to an unchanging, timeless state. This was the kind of eternity that divine beings inhabited, a state without beginning or end, without change or variation. In tomb inscriptions, this word often appeared alongside another word, nehe, which meant cyclical time, the kind of forever that involved constant renewal, like the endless turning of the seasons or the daily rising and setting of the sun. Together, these two concepts expressed a complete vision of eternity that combined absolute permanence with continuous renewal. A ruler's tomb inscription might promise that he would live for all jet and all nehe, meaning he would experience both unchanging eternal existence and constantly renewing eternal life. To the ancient Egyptians, eternity was not some vague or abstract idea. It was a destination they were actively preparing for. It was a state of being they believed they could achieve, and it was a promise written into the very stones of their magnificent monuments, a promise that has lasted now for thousands of years. Fact 17. Beer in ancient Egypt was not considered a luxury item or something reserved for special occasions. It was an absolute necessity of daily life for people at every level of society. The beer was made from partially baked barley bread that was then soaked in water and left to ferment. The result was a thick, nutritious beverage that was mildly alcoholic. Workers were frequently paid in bread and beer rather than in money, making these items both currency and sustenance. Even children drank a lighter, less alcoholic version of beer because it was considered safer than water, which might carry diseases or contaminants. Beer was also offered to divine beings in temples and placed in tombs to provide nourishment for the deceased in the afterlife. The brewing process was usually done in large batches and was often overseen by women. Different recipes produced different flavours and strengths, ranging from sweet to sour depending on the ingredients used and how long the fermentation was allowed to continue. The beer ancient Egyptians drank was very different from the clear golden beverage many people think of today. Egyptian beer was cloudy, thick, and filling, more like a liquid meal than a simple drink. Its central role in society was so important that running out of beer was considered a genuine hardship. Fact 18. Bread was the other staple food of ancient Egypt, eaten by everyone from the poorest farmers to the wealthiest rulers. However, the process of making bread often introduced a serious problem. The grain had to be ground into flour using stone grinding tools, and over time tiny fragments of stone would wear off and mix into the flour. When bread was baked with this grit-containing flour, it became quite harsh on teeth. Archaeological studies of preserved bodies frequently show severe dental wear, cracked enamel, and painful abscesses. This was not a result of poor hygiene or neglect. It was simply the unavoidable consequence of eating bread made with stone-ground flour over a lifetime. Despite this problem, bread remained absolutely essential to the Egyptian diet. It came in countless varieties and recipes, from simple everyday loaves to special honey-sweetened treats baked for festivals and celebrations. Bread was often baked in communal ovens that served entire neighbourhoods, and the smell of warm grain would fill villages and cities. Along with beer, bread formed the absolute foundation of the Egyptian diet. While it sustained life and provided necessary nutrition, it also slowly wore down teeth over the decades, leaving its mark on nearly every person who lived in that ancient land. Fact 19. The ruler of Egypt held a unique position that set this civilization apart from many others in the ancient world. The pharaoh, as we call these rulers today, was not simply a king or political leader. He was considered to be both a human ruler and a living divine being at the same time. Ancient Egyptians saw the pharaoh as the direct son of Ra the sun, and as the earthly manifestation of Horus, the falcon-headed divine being associated with kingship in the sky. The pharaoh's authority was therefore absolute and unquestionable. He was personally responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order and balance that kept the entire universe functioning properly. In life, the pharaoh served as the essential link between the divine realm and ordinary people. In death, he would become fully divine, joining the other eternal beings in the heavens. This dual identity was constantly reinforced through ritual, through temple inscriptions, and through massive architectural projects. Even the pharaoh's image, whether carved in stone or cast in precious gold, was believed to hold real spiritual power. To obey the pharaoh was to honor the divine realm itself. His role as both earthly king and divine being gave Egyptian civilization its distinctive character and helped maintain social order for thousands of years. Fact 20. One of the most distinctive accessories worn by Egyptian rulers was a false beard. This might seem strange to us today, but it held deep symbolic meaning. Regardless of whether the ruler was male or female, pharaohs sometimes wore a stylized, plaited false beard during important ceremonies. This beard was a deliberate symbol emphasizing their divine status. The beard design linked the ruler directly to Osiris, the divine being who ruled over the afterlife and was often shown wearing a long, narrow beard on his chin. These false beards were typically made of metal, often gold, and were attached to the head with straps that went behind the ears. Even female rulers like Hatshepsut were shown in statues and wall carvings wearing these ceremonial beards. This was not about gender or fashion. It was a sacred emblem, a clear visual sign that the person wearing it was not merely human, but a divine ruler governing under heavenly authority. In portraits, statues, and relief carvings, the false beard remains one of the clearest and most immediate signals of Egyptian kingship and the unique blend of political and spiritual power that defined their civilization. Fact 21. Unlike in many other ancient cultures, Egyptian women enjoyed significant legal rights and freedoms. Women could own property in their own names and could inherit land and possessions. They could engage in business contracts and conduct trade. They could even initiate divorce proceedings if their marriage was unhappy. Women could run their own businesses, manage large estates, and appear in legal courts as equals to men. Wealthy women sometimes acted as major landowners and became patrons who funded temple offerings or commissioned works of art. While political power generally remained in male hands, there were notable exceptions throughout Egyptian history. Queens and high priestesses sometimes wielded very real influence and authority. This relatively equal treatment of women was rooted in the concept of Ma'at, which emphasized balance and fairness in all aspects of life. In practical daily terms, this meant that women could participate in the economy and in society much more freely than women in ancient Greece or Rome, civilizations that came later. These legal freedoms made Egyptian society remarkably advanced for its time in terms of how it approached women's rights and their proper place in the social and economic structure. Fact 22. The famous Cleopatra, who ruled Egypt in its final years as an independent kingdom, is often thought of as the perfect example of an Egyptian queen. However, the truth about her heritage is more complex. Cleopatra VII, to give her full designation, actually descended from Greek Macedonian rulers who had taken control of Egypt after Alexander the Great conquered the region. The Ptolemaic dynasty, as her family line was called, maintained Greek language, customs, and political structures, even though they ruled over a predominantly Egyptian population. For nearly 3 centuries, the Ptolemaic rulers kept themselves culturally separate from the people they governed. Cleopatra, however, distinguished herself from her predecessors in important ways. She was actually the first of her entire dynasty to learn and speak the Egyptian language fluently. She also presented herself in religious ceremonies as the embodiment of the divine being Isis, fully embracing Egyptian religious traditions. This blending of her Greek Macedonian heritage with deliberate adoption of Egyptian cultural identity made her a unique figure in history. She served as a bridge between 2 different worlds, and she clearly understood the symbolic power that came from claiming Egypt's ancient identity as her own, even though her bloodline traced back to Greece rather than to the ancient pharaohs of earlier ages. Fact 23. Royal marriages in ancient Egypt sometimes followed patterns that seem very unusual to modern people. To preserve what they believed was the purity of the divine royal bloodline, pharaohs occasionally married their own sisters or half-sisters. This practice echoed the mythology they believed in. In their sacred stories, Isis and Osiris were both siblings and spouses, and their union was seen as holy and proper. While such marriages were primarily political arrangements designed to ensure the throne stayed within the immediate royal family, the pharaoh also maintained other wives and relationships at the same time. Not every ruler followed this custom of sibling marriage, but when they did, it reinforced the idea that the pharaoh belonged to a different category than ordinary humans. These marriages were less about personal feelings or romantic love and much more about maintaining an unbroken continuity of divine kingship. The practice emphasized that royal blood was special, sacred, and needed to be kept as pure as possible. It was one more way the pharaohs set themselves apart from the rest of society, and reinforced their claim to be living bridges between the human world and the eternal divine realm. Fact 24. In ancient Egypt, cats were far more than simply useful animals or beloved pets. They held a sacred status in society and were closely linked to Bastet, a divine being associated with home, fertility, and protection. Bastet was often depicted either as a lioness or as a woman with a cat's head. Her nature was both gentle and fiercely protective, making her a beloved figure throughout Egyptian culture. The practical value of cats added to their importance. Cats naturally controlled rats and mice, protecting precious grain stores from vermin. This made them extremely valuable in an agricultural society where stored grain meant survival. Many households kept cats and treated them with genuine affection and reverence. Harming a cat, even accidentally, was considered a grave offense against Bastet herself and could bring serious consequences. Temples dedicated to Bastet often housed many cats, and images of cats appeared everywhere, in amulets worn for protection, in statues placed in homes and temples, and in paintings decorating walls. In both practical life and symbolic representation, the cat was seen as a guardian, a bringer of comfort and safety, and a living embodiment of divine grace and watchful protection. Fact 25. The reverence ancient Egyptians felt for cats extended into their legal system, with strict laws designed to protect these sacred animals. Killing a cat, whether the act was intentional or accidental, was considered a serious crime that could be punished by death. Ancient historians who visited Egypt, including one named Diodorus Siculus, recorded incidents where angry crowds rioted over harm done to a cat. Even if the harm occurred completely by accident, people might demand severe punishment for the offender. This extreme legal protection reflected the deep belief that cats carried the blessing of Bastet, and that harming one was not simply cruelty to an animal, but an actual offence against divine power itself. Cats were so integral to Egyptian society and religion that they were often mummified after death and buried alongside their human owners. This practice ensured that the companionship between person and cat would continue in the afterlife. The preserved bodies of cats have been found in tombs throughout Egypt, sometimes buried with the same care and ceremony given to human family members, showing just how deeply cats were woven into both the daily life and the spiritual beliefs of ancient Egyptian civilization. Fact 26. The ibis bird, with its elegant curved beak and distinctive appearance, was considered sacred to Thoth, the divine being associated with wisdom, knowledge, and the art of writing. To honour Thoth and seek his favour, ancient Egyptians mummified ibis birds in truly vast numbers. These preserved birds were placed in dedicated underground chambers called catacombs, where they were stored in pottery jars or wrapped bundles. Archaeological excavations have uncovered literally millions of these mummified birds in certain locations. Some were brought as offerings by pilgrims who travelled to temples hoping to gain Thoth's blessing or assistance. Others were part of regular temple rituals performed by priests. The sheer scale of this practice is almost difficult to comprehend. Entire industries must have existed to breed, raise, and prepare these birds for their sacred purpose. This mass preservation of ibises reflects how deeply animal worship was embedded in Egyptian religious life. Animals were not merely symbols or representations of divine powers. They were seen as actual living manifestations of those powers, deserving of respect, care, and proper burial rites just as humans received. Fact 27. Ancient Egyptian temples were not randomly placed across the landscape. Their positioning and orientation followed precise astronomical principles that required careful planning and observation. Many temples were specifically aligned so that sunlight at certain times of the year would shine directly through doorways and halls into the innermost sanctuary, illuminating the statue housed within. The most famous example of this deliberate alignment is Abu Simbel, where twice each year the rays of the rising sun travel deep into the temple chambers to directly light the carved figures seated beside Pharaoh Ramesses II. These alignments were considered acts of devotion and represented a tangible connection between the earthly temple and the cosmic powers above. By aligning their sacred buildings with the movements of the sun, the Egyptians tied their worship directly to the daily rebirth of light itself. This reinforced the presence of divine power in the natural world and symbolized the eternal renewal of life that they believed would continue forever in the afterlife. The precision required for these alignments demonstrates both advanced astronomical knowledge and the immense importance placed on connecting physical structures with heavenly patterns. Fact 28. In Egyptian religious belief, the sun was not simply a ball of fire in the sky. It was understood as the divine being Ra himself travelling across the heavens in a sacred boat during the daylight hours. But the sun's journey did not end at sunset. When the sun disappeared below the western horizon each evening, Ra was believed to descend into the underworld, beginning a perilous voyage through 12 different regions. Each region corresponded to 1 hour of the night. Throughout this dark journey, Ra faced numerous challenges and dangers. The most serious threat came from a massive serpent called Apophis, who embodied chaos and destruction. Apophis sought to stop the sun from ever rising again by attacking Ra's boat. However, Ra was not alone on this nightly voyage. Other divine beings accompanied him, helping to defend against Apophis and overcome the obstacles in each region of the underworld. After successfully completing this dangerous journey through darkness, Ra would be reborn at sunrise, emerging triumphant in the eastern sky. This nightly cycle mirrored the Egyptian understanding of life, death, and rebirth that formed the foundation of their entire worldview. Temples and tombs often depicted this journey in vivid detail, showing Ra's boat gliding through star-filled darkness, reminding everyone that even the greatest powers had to pass through trials to achieve renewal. Fact 29. Obelisks were tall, tapering stone monuments that often stood before temple entrances. These impressive structures were far more than simple architectural decorations. Each obelisk was understood to represent a petrified ray of sunlight, creating a direct physical connection between the earth and the sun. Their shape naturally drew the eye upward toward the sky, emphasizing the link between the earthly realm and the heavens above. The pointed tips of obelisks were frequently covered with electrum, a precious alloy of gold and silver that would blaze brilliantly when struck by sunlight. The four sides of each obelisk were typically covered with carved inscriptions, dedicating the monument to divine powers and celebrating the achievements of whichever pharaoh had commissioned its creation. Standing upright and reaching toward the sky, obelisks symbolize stability, divine authority, and the eternal bond connecting heaven and earth. Their sacred role was so highly valued that conquering rulers from later civilizations, including the Romans and much later the French, transported these massive monuments across vast distances to display them in their own cities as symbols of power and connection to ancient wisdom. Many of these relocated obelisks still stand today in cities far from Egypt. Fact 30. Despite being carved from stone thousands of years ago, many of Egypt's ancient obelisks have survived remarkably well. Some still stand in their original locations in Egypt, while others were moved to distant countries where they remain today. The oldest surviving examples date back to the Middle Kingdom period, and the hieroglyphic inscriptions carved into their surfaces remain sharp and readable, despite the passage of millennia. The exceptional durability of these monuments comes from how they were constructed. Each obelisk was carved from a single, unbroken piece of granite, usually quarried from sites near Aswan in southern Egypt. These massive stone shafts then had to be transported hundreds of miles without any modern machinery or tools. Some obelisks weigh more than 300 tons, making their transportation and erection even more impressive. The survival of these monuments testifies to both the incredible skill of Egyptian stonemasons and the deep cultural significance these structures held for the civilization that created them. Whether casting long shadows across ancient temple courtyards or standing today in modern capitals like Paris, London, and New York, these obelisks remain silent but powerful witnesses to the artistry and ambition of ancient Egypt. Fact 31. Evidence shows that ancient Egyptians practiced a form of dentistry, attempting to treat the serious dental problems caused by their gritty diet. Archaeological examination of preserved bodies reveals that some people had holes drilled into their teeth, apparently to relieve the pressure and pain caused by abscesses. Ancient medical texts written on papyrus describe various remedies for toothaches, including rinses made from mixtures of herbs, honey, and beer. Some preserved bodies have been found with replacement teeth, though scholars remain uncertain whether these were functional prosthetics used during life or ceremonial additions made after death. While their understanding of dental science was limited by the knowledge available at the time, these early attempts at treatment reveal a civilization willing to experiment and innovate. They recognized that oral health was important, especially in a society where speaking clearly was important for rituals, where eating properly was necessary for health, and where maintaining ritual purity held spiritual significance. The tools and techniques they developed represent early steps toward what would eventually become modern dentistry. Fact 32. Archaeological excavations of ancient Egyptian burial sites have uncovered bronze surgical instruments including scalpels, needles, forceps, and even probes carefully stored among tomb goods. The presence of these well-crafted tools suggests that physicians in ancient Egypt possessed real surgical skills and performed practical operations on living patients. Ancient medical texts describe various procedures including stitching wounds closed, setting broken bones properly, and draining painful abscesses. Surgery was often combined with recitation of prayers and presentation of offerings to divine powers, reflecting the Egyptian belief that physical health and spiritual well-being were deeply interconnected and could not be separated. While not all surgical procedures would have been painless or successful by modern medical standards, the quality of the tools themselves reveals much about ancient medical practice. The instruments were finely made and carefully preserved, showing that surgery was a respected and organized profession. These tools represent some of the earliest evidence of systematic surgical practice in human history. Fact 33. Egyptian medical texts recorded hundreds of different treatments for common ailments ranging from headaches to hair loss. These remedies blended practical herbal medicine with magical incantations, ensuring that both the physical body and the spiritual aspect of a person were properly addressed. For toothaches, a paste might be made from crushed herbs mixed with honey and applied directly to the painful gums. For baldness, various concoctions made from animal fats would be massaged into the scalp while prayers were recited. Many of the ingredients mentioned in these ancient prescriptions, such as garlic, onion, and fig, are still valued today in modern herbal medicine for their beneficial properties. Though some ancient remedies seem quite strange to us now, they reveal a culture that was deeply invested in healing and maintaining health. Illness was not seen as an inevitable condition that simply had to be endured. Instead, Egyptians believed that sickness could and should be actively treated through a combination of earthly medicines and appeals to divine assistance. This proactive approach to healthcare shows a sophisticated understanding that wellness required attention to multiple aspects of human existence. Fact 34. The sense of smell played a powerful and important role throughout Egyptian life. Perfumes and aromatic oils were used extensively for both personal grooming and religious ceremonies. These fragrant substances were created from flowers, herbs, and precious resins that were carefully blended into smooth, pleasant-smelling ointments. Wealthy individuals would anoint their bodies with scented oils every day as part of their grooming routine. Priests used these same aromatic substances to purify statues of divine beings before performing rituals. Certain specific scents, particularly frankincense and myrrh, were considered offerings in themselves. These costly resins were burned in temples, their fragrant smoke rising upward to please divine powers. The creation of perfumes was recognized as a skilled craft, and some recipes were closely guarded secrets passed down within families or temple communities. In preparing for the afterlife, Perfumes and oils were placed in tombs to ensure that the deceased would remain fragrant and pleasant for all eternity. The importance placed on pleasant scents reveals a culture that engaged all the senses in their approach to both daily life and spiritual practice. Fact 35. In ancient Egypt, cosmetics were worn by both men and women, and their use went far beyond simple vanity or decoration. Makeup served practical health purposes as well as aesthetic ones. Both men and women applied red ochre, a natural earth pigment, to their lips and cheeks. Dark pigments were carefully applied around the eyes to create the distinctive Egyptian eye shape we recognize from their art. These eye cosmetics were believed to ward off evil spiritual influences, and also helped protect against the harsh glare of the intense desert sun. Makeup was so essential to Egyptian life that even the poorest members of society would try to have at least a small pot of coal for eye application. The act of applying cosmetics was as much a daily ritual as it was a beauty routine, blending practical considerations with spiritual protection and social presentation. This universal practice shows that personal appearance was considered important across all levels of society and was connected to ideas about health, protection, and proper presentation before both human observers and divine powers. Fact 36. Kohl, the dark eye cosmetic so characteristic of Egyptian appearance, was made from ground minerals including galena, a lead-based ore. This substance was used to create the iconic almond-shaped eye outline visible in countless Egyptian paintings and carvings. Beyond its striking visual effect, kohl served several practical purposes that made it far more than decoration. The dark pigment helped reduce glare from the intense sunlight, functioning somewhat like the eye black modern athletes wear. It also acted as an insect repellent, helping keep flies away from the vulnerable eyes. Modern scientific studies have revealed that kohl may have had antibacterial properties as well, helping prevent eye infections that were common in a climate with blowing sand and dust. The distinctive eye design itself carried symbolic meaning, echoing the Eye of Horus, which was one of the most powerful protective symbols in Egyptian culture. Thus, wearing kohl was simultaneously practical protection, health maintenance, aesthetic enhancement, and spiritual safeguarding. It represented a perfect blending of the physical and spiritual worldviews that characterize so much of Egyptian life. Fact 37. Funerals in ancient Egypt could be elaborate and highly emotional public events. Some families hired professional mourning women to help express grief on behalf of the deceased and their family. These women were often highly skilled in the performance of ritual lamentation. They would wail loudly, tear at their hair, beat their chests, and engage in other dramatic displays of sorrow. Their performance was not considered false or theatrical. Instead, it was understood as a sacred duty with deep spiritual importance. These professional mourners were imitating the actions of the divine beings Isis and Nephthys, who in sacred mythology mourned for Osiris after his death. By recreating this divine mourning on earth, the hired women were believed to help guide the soul of the deceased person safely into the afterlife. The more prominent and important the deceased person had been in life, the more mourners might be hired to attend the funeral. Their collective cries would echo through streets and into the tomb itself. Scenes depicting these mourning women appear in many tomb paintings, frozen forever in gestures of grief. Their presence shows that funeral ceremonies were both public displays of loss and deeply symbolic reenactments of sacred events. Fact 38. The riches buried alongside Egypt's elite members created a constant temptation for theft, but robbing a tomb was considered one of the most serious crimes imaginable. Beyond the simple theft of material wealth, tomb robbery was believed to endanger the eternal soul of the deceased person. By disturbing the burial and stealing the provisions meant for the afterlife, robbers were disrupting the deceased person's eternal rest and potentially condemning them to suffering in the world beyond death. Legal documents from the New Kingdom period reveal the harsh punishments given to convicted tomb robbers. These included severe beatings, physical mutilation, and often execution. Even workers who had helped construct the tombs and knew their layouts were sometimes caught breaking into them years later, betraying the trust that had been placed in them. Beyond legal punishment, there was also the threat of divine retribution. Many people believed that the powers themselves would curse anyone who violated a tomb. Yet despite all these dangers, both legal and supernatural, tomb robbery remained a persistent problem. The lure of gold and treasure was apparently strong enough to overcome fear of punishment. The threat was so serious that even the Valley of the Kings, despite being a remote and supposedly secret location, was largely stripped of its treasures within just a few centuries of active use. Fact 39. To protect their final resting places from disturbance, some Egyptians inscribed curses directly onto tomb walls or doorways. These written warnings promised terrible consequences to anyone who dared enter without proper authority or who disturbed the deceased. Some curses threatened loss of wealth and health in life. Others promised that the offender would face divine judgment and be denied proper burial themselves, forcing them to wander eternally without rest. One tomb from the Old Kingdom contains an inscription warning that anyone who enters improperly will have their neck seized like a bird, a vivid and threatening image. Other curses promised that divine powers would pursue the violator and ensure they faced punishment both in life and after death. Some modern scholars think these curses functioned more as symbolic warnings meant to deter potential thieves rather than expressions of literal magical belief. However, their very presence on tomb entrances demonstrates how seriously ancient Egyptians took the security and sanctity of burial spaces. Even in death they sought ways to protect themselves, using the power of written words to guard against those who might disturb their eternal peace. Fact 40. Despite centuries of intensive archaeological exploration, Egypt continues to hold secrets beneath its sands. Modern technology, including ground-penetrating radar and other scanning methods, has revealed unusual features inside pyramids and beneath desert surfaces that may indicate undiscovered chambers or passageways. In the Great Pyramid, scientists detected a mysterious void above the Grand Gallery in the year 2017. This discovery sparked immediate debate about what purpose this space might have served and whether it might contain anything of significance. Vast stretches of desert landscape conceal entire settlements and cities that were swallowed by shifting sands over millennia. Beneath the Nile Delta region, substantial ruins lie buried under thick layers of accumulated silt deposited by the river over thousands of years. Archaeologists strongly suspect that many royal and noble burial places remain completely hidden, their treasures and historical records still intact and waiting to be found. Each new discovery, whether made through advanced technology or traditional excavation methods, reshapes our understanding of Egyptian civilization. These ongoing findings remind us that despite everything we have learned, much more remains literally beneath the surface, waiting for future generations of researchers to uncover. Fact 41. Among the carved reliefs and painted scenes decorating Egyptian temple walls, occasional images appear that puzzle modern scholars. Strange creatures are depicted that do not match any known species, either living or extinct. Some of these unusual images may be purely symbolic, representing abstract qualities or divine attributes rather than actual animals. Others might depict creatures that were imported from distant lands, animals that the Egyptians encountered through trade but which were unfamiliar and exotic to them. Still others could represent animals that are now extinct but which still existed during ancient times. In the Temple of Seti I at Abydos, some hieroglyphic shapes have even been interpreted by certain people as resembling modern objects like helicopters or submarines. However, most experts attribute these particular images to the effects of overlapping carvings from different time periods. When one inscription was carved over an earlier one, the combination of partial symbols from both periods created shapes that coincidentally resemble modern technology. Whether these mysterious images are deliberate symbolic representations, records of unfamiliar animals, or simply the accidental results of recarving, they continue to feed speculation and highlight the many layers of mystery still embedded in Egypt's ancient monuments. Fact 42. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799 by French soldiers stationed near the town of Rosetta, became the key that finally unlocked the meaning of hieroglyphic writing. This black basalt slab, broken and incomplete but still largely readable, carried a single decree written in 3 different scripts. The top section contained hieroglyphic writing, the middle section was written in Demotic script, which was a cursive form of Egyptian writing, and the bottom section was in ancient Greek. Because scholars of the modern era could read ancient Greek fluently, the Rosetta Stone provided the crucial breakthrough needed to understand hieroglyphs, which had been mysterious and unreadable for more than 1,000 years. A French scholar named Jean-François Champollion worked intensively on decoding the hieroglyphics section during the 1820s, using the Greek text as a guide to understand what the hieroglyphs were saying. His success finally revealed the full richness and complexity of ancient Egyptian texts, transforming our ability to understand their civilization. Today, this important artifact resides in the British Museum in London, where visitors can see its worn surface, still bearing the ancient words that reconnected the modern world with one of humanity's oldest written languages. Fact 43. The Nile River served as ancient Egypt's primary highway for transportation, but sometimes boats needed to travel to places where the water could not take them. To solve this practical problem, the Egyptians designed vessels that could be completely disassembled, carried overland by teams of workers, and then reassembled when water was reached again. This innovation was especially useful during military campaigns that required crossing desert regions, during expeditions to foreign lands beyond Egypt's borders, or when moving large ships past cataracts where the river became too rough and rocky for safe navigation. Archaeological discoveries, including the famous Khufu ship that was found buried in pieces near the Great Pyramid, reveal the impressive skill of Egyptian shipbuilders. They crafted wooden planks that fit together so precisely that they could be taken apart and rejoined multiple times without losing structural strength or becoming leaky. This remarkable versatility in boat design helped keep Egypt connected with distant regions and allowed for exploration and trade far beyond what would have been possible if boats were permanently fixed structures. The ability to transport disassembled boats across land demonstrates the practical innovation and engineering creativity that characterized Egyptian civilization. Fact 44. Papyrus, made from the soft inner pith of the papyrus plant which grew abundantly along the Nile's marshy edges, revolutionized record-keeping and communication throughout the ancient world. Thin strips were cut from the plant stems, then laid side by side in one direction, with another layer placed perpendicular on top. These crossed layers were pressed together and dried, creating a smooth, flexible writing surface. Papyrus sheets were significantly lighter and more portable than the heavy clay tablets used by other ancient civilizations. They could be rolled into scrolls for easy storage and transportation. Egypt produced papyrus in large quantities and exported it throughout the Mediterranean region, making it a valuable trade commodity and a cornerstone of ancient commerce. Many papyrus documents have survived for thousands of years in Egypt's extremely dry climate, preserving an incredible range of writings including literary works, legal records, detailed medical texts, and personal letters between individuals. These preserved writings provide us with direct access to the thoughts, knowledge, and daily concerns of people who lived millennia ago. The legacy of papyrus was so significant that our modern word paper derives directly from papyrus, acknowledging this ancient Egyptian innovation. Fact 45. Among the more unexpected and delightful treasures recovered from ancient Egypt are love poems written on papyrus, or scratched onto pottery fragments called ostraca. These verses are surprisingly intimate, playful, and often remarkably modern in their emotional tone. They speak of longing and desire, of beauty and attraction, of stolen moments between lovers. Some use nature as metaphor, comparing a beloved person's eyes to stars in the night sky, or describing lips as sweet as wine or honey. These poems were likely composed for festivals or for private enjoyment between couples. They reveal a deeply personal and emotional dimension to Egyptian life that is often overshadowed by the grand monuments and formal religious imagery. The poems remind us that beneath all the ceremonial grandeur and spiritual solemnity, ancient Egyptians experienced the same feelings of romantic love and desire that people feel today. They laughed, they flirted, they longed for connection with others. These verses, preserved by accident or by care across thousands of years, give us a window into the beating hearts of real people who lived, loved, and dreamed in that ancient civilization. Fact 46. Music in ancient Egypt was understood to possess special power beyond simple entertainment or aesthetic pleasure. It was believed capable of healing illness, bestowing blessings, and providing spiritual protection. Various instruments, including harps, flutes, lyres, and percussion instruments, accompanied both religious ceremonies in temples and celebrations in daily life. Certain songs were thought to call down the favour of divine powers or to soothe restless spirits that might otherwise cause harm. Musicians who performed in temples held respected social positions, and their role was considered spiritually important. Some hymns and ritual songs have survived in written form, preserved on temple walls or in papyrus texts. Music was also a central element of celebrations and festivals, from harvest gatherings to royal processions, where rhythm and melody merged with ritual to create moments of shared joy and communal identity. The Egyptians understood that music could affect emotions, alter consciousness, and connect the earthly realm with the spiritual world in ways that words alone could not achieve. Fact 47. The lotus flower held profound symbolic significance in ancient Egyptian culture. It was far more than simply a beautiful aquatic plant. The lotus became a sacred emblem representing creation, purity, and the eternal cycle of rebirth. The flower's natural behaviour of closing its petals at night and sinking slightly below the water surface, then reopening and rising again with the morning sun, created a perfect natural metaphor for the cycle of death and rebirth that was so central to Egyptian spiritual beliefs. In creation mythology, the lotus was said to have risen from the primordial waters at the very beginning of time, its petals opening to reveal the newborn sun, bringing light and life to the universe. Artists incorporated lotus motifs extensively, carving and painting them on temple walls, tomb decorations, furniture, and personal jewellery. The flower appeared in funerary offerings as well. Either actual lotus blossoms or images of them were placed with deceased persons to ensure their own rebirth in the afterlife. Growing in quiet temple lakes and along the Nile's banks, the lotus served as a constant visible reminder of life's ability to emerge renewed and fresh from darkness and dormancy. Its presence connected the Egyptians daily to their deepest beliefs about the nature of existence. Fact 48. Egyptian religion is immediately recognizable for its distinctive divine beings that combined human bodies with animal heads. These hybrid forms were not meant to be understood as literal physical descriptions. Instead, they were symbolic portraits that expressed divine qualities and powers through visual combination. Horus, depicted with a falcon's head on a human body, embodied kingship and represented the vast sky. Anubis, shown with a jackal's head, represented protection of the dead and oversight of burial rites. Thoth, bearing an ibis head, was linked to wisdom, knowledge, and the sacred art of writing. These symbolic combinations allowed artists to convey complex divine attributes through immediately recognizable visual forms. The divine beings were not limited to these hybrid appearances. They could also manifest as fully human or as completely animal, depending on the specific story being told or the particular ritual being performed. This fluidity of form reflected the Egyptian understanding that divine powers existed beyond the constraints that limited humans. They could reveal themselves in whatever shape best expressed their essential nature and their role in the cosmic order. Fact 49. The Nile River teemed with crocodiles, powerful and dangerous predators that inspired both fear and deep reverence among the people who lived along its banks. The divine being Sobek, depicted with a crocodile's head atop a human body, embodied the river's might, its life-giving fertility, and its unpredictable and sometimes deadly nature. Sobek was believed to have the power to protect people from the many dangers lurking in and near the river. However, if angered or disrespected, he could also unleash those same dangers upon them. Temples dedicated to Sobek's worship often maintained live crocodiles within their sacred precincts. These crocodiles were treated as living manifestations of the divine being himself. They were pampered with fine food, adorned with jewellery, and treated with the utmost respect and care. When these sacred crocodiles died, they received full mummification and were buried with elaborate ceremony, just as important humans were. Sobek's dual nature as both life-giver and potential destroyer made him a complex and important figure in Egyptian spirituality. His favour was considered essential for anyone who needed safe passage along the river, or who depended on the Nile's annual flood for agricultural prosperity. Fact 50. Anubis, the divine being with a sleek black jackal head mounted on a human body, was among Egypt's most immediately recognizable spiritual figures. He played a central role in funerary practices and beliefs about the afterlife. Anubis served as the protector of graves and burial places, the overseer of the mummification process, and the guide who led souls through the dangerous underworld journey. In the famous scene depicting the weighing of the heart ceremony, it is Anubis who carefully adjusts the scales to ensure perfect balance and fairness in judgment. The choice of the jackal form to represent this divine being was deliberate and meaningful. Jackals were scavengers that naturally prowled around cemeteries and burial grounds at night, seeking food among the tombs. By transforming this feared scavenger into a divine guardian, the Egyptians turned something frightening into something protective and holy. Priests who performed embalming rituals often wore jackal masks during their work, symbolically taking on the role and power of Anubis himself. For ancient Egyptians facing the mystery and fear of death, Anubis's presence offered both comfort and warning. He was a reminder that the journey into eternity required living with purity and truth, but also an assurance that proper guidance and protection would be provided to those who earned it. Fact 51. In Egyptian cosmology, the sky itself was not merely empty space above the earth. It was understood as the physical body of Nut, a divine being who arched protectively over the entire world. Each evening, according to their beliefs, Nut would swallow the sun, taking it into her body where it would travel through the hours of darkness. At dawn, she would give birth to the sun again, allowing it to emerge renewed and brilliant in the eastern sky. This daily cycle represented the eternal pattern of death and rebirth that governed all existence. Nut was often depicted in temple art as a woman whose elongated body stretched from one horizon to the other, her skin covered with countless stars. Her role extended beyond the cosmic to the personal. She was seen as a protective presence, shielding the earth from the forces of chaos that existed beyond the ordered universe. She also offered deceased individuals a place among the stars themselves, incorporating them into her celestial body. Her endless embrace of the sun, swallowing it each night and birthing it each morning, mirrored the eternal rhythms that shaped Egyptian understanding of time, existence, and the promise of continuous renewal. Fact 52. Sekhmet, portrayed as a divine being with the fierce head of a lioness, embodied the dangerous dual forces of destruction and healing. Her very breath was said to create the scorching winds that swept across the desert, bringing intense heat that could be deadly. Her rage and fury were legendary in Egyptian mythology. According to one famous story, she once nearly destroyed all of humanity in a violent rampage, consumed by bloodlust. She was only stopped when divine powers tricked her into drinking red-coloured beer that she mistook for blood, causing her to become intoxicated and fall asleep. Yet despite her terrifying destructive potential, Sekhmet was also revered as a divine patron of medicine and healing. Her priests were recognized as skilled healers who could treat illness and injury. She embodied the profound understanding that destruction and restoration are two sides of the same force, that sometimes what appears harmful can actually clear the way for new growth and healing. Temples dedicated to Sekhmet were filled with numerous statues of the lioness-headed figure, perhaps serving to channel and contain her immense power, or to remind worshippers of the respect and careful reverence required when dealing with forces this potent and unpredictable. Fact 53. Within the boundaries of many temple complexes, builders constructed artificial lakes that served important ritual purposes. These sacred bodies of water were used for purification ceremonies that priests performed before entering the most holy areas of the temple. Priests would bathe in these clear waters to ensure they were physically and spiritually clean before performing sacred duties and approaching divine statues. The lakes held deeper symbolic meaning as well. They represented the primordial waters from which all creation emerged at the beginning of time, making them powerful spaces for spiritual renewal and connection to the fundamental forces of existence. During religious festivals, these temple lakes played active roles in celebrations. Sacred boats carrying divine statues would be floated across their surfaces in ceremonial processions, reenacting mythological journeys. The presence of a lake within temple walls reinforced the concept that each temple was designed as a miniature version of the entire universe, complete with its own representation of the sacred waters from which life first arose. These pools were not mere decorative features, but essential elements in the symbolic geography, that made temples function as gateways between the earthly realm and the eternal spiritual dimension. Fact 54. Temple priests followed remarkably strict cleanliness rituals as part of their sacred duties. One of the most distinctive practices was the complete removal of all body hair. This was not about personal appearance or fashion. It was entirely about achieving and maintaining the state of spiritual purity required to serve in the presence of divine powers. Priests shaved their heads completely bald and removed hair from their entire bodies. This practice was performed regularly, sometimes even daily, to ensure they remained free from anything that might be considered unclean. Beyond hair removal, priests also bathed multiple times throughout each day in the sacred temple lakes. They wore only freshly cleaned linen garments, never wool or other materials. They followed dietary restrictions, avoiding certain foods before performing important rituals. These extensive practices were part of a broader belief system that held serving divine powers required a state of absolute physical and spiritual cleanliness. This rigorous discipline reinforced the separation between the sacred realm and ordinary daily life. It marked priests as people who had stepped outside normal human existence to serve as intermediaries between the mortal world and the eternal powers that governed the universe. Fact 55. The colour blue held profound symbolic significance throughout ancient Egyptian culture. It represented multiple interconnected concepts, all related to life and divine protection. Blue was the colour of the life-giving waters of the Nile River, without which Egypt could not exist. It was also the colour of the sky above and the heavens beyond, the realm where divine beings dwelled. Because of these associations, blue became linked to creation, fertility, and divine safeguarding. Egyptians developed a synthetic blue pigment, now called Egyptian blue by modern researchers, which they used extensively in artwork, jewellery, and protective amulets. Some divine beings, including Amun and Hathor, were sometimes depicted with blue-coloured skin in temple paintings and carvings, visually marking them as cosmic beings rather than earthly creatures. Faience beads and decorative tiles in brilliant blue hues adorned temples and tombs, surrounding sacred spaces with the colour that represented life itself. Ordinary people wore blue jewellery and amulets, believing the colour would bring blessings and shield them from harm. The widespread use of blue throughout Egyptian art and daily life reflected their deep understanding of colour as carrying real power, not merely aesthetic appeal. Fact 56. In Egyptian symbolic language, the colour red presented a fascinating paradox. It simultaneously represented opposite forces and concepts. On one hand, red symbolised life, energy, vitality, and the life-giving power of the sun. It was associated with strength and health. Artists used red ochre pigment to paint the skin of male figures in tomb paintings and temple reliefs, showing them as healthy and vigorous. On the other hand, red also represented chaos, danger, violence, and destruction. It was particularly associated with Set, a divine being linked to storms, disorder, and the harsh desert. In protective magical practices, scribes sometimes used red ink specifically to write the names of dangerous beings or harmful forces, believing this would help neutralize their power and prevent them from causing harm. This dual nature made red one of the most complex and potent colors in the Egyptian palette. The same color that represented the warmth and energy necessary for life could also embody the destructive forces that could end life. This understanding reflected a sophisticated worldview that recognized how life and death, creation and destruction were interconnected rather than simply opposite forces. Fact 57. The scarab beetle became one of the most powerful and widely recognized symbols in all of Egyptian culture. This connection arose from careful observation of beetle behavior. The scarab species common in Egypt has a distinctive habit of rolling balls of dung across the ground, which it uses for laying eggs and as food for its larvae. Ancient Egyptians watching this behavior saw a remarkable parallel to how they envisioned the sun moving across the sky. They imagined a divine being pushing the sun disk across the heavens each day, just as the beetle pushed its ball across the earth. This connection linked the humble beetle to the most important celestial body and its daily journey of death and rebirth. Egyptians wore scarab-shaped amulets carved from stone, faience, or precious metals as personal charms for luck, protection, and renewal. Some scarabs were inscribed with prayers, magical spells, or the names of their owners to make them more personally powerful. Large heart scarabs were specially prepared and placed over the chests of mummified bodies, engraved with specific spells from funerary texts to protect the soul during judgment. Scarabs were worn during life, buried with the dead, and even exchanged as diplomatic gifts between rulers. Their enduring symbolism meant that wearing or carrying a scarab was like carrying a piece of the eternal solar cycle itself, a tangible reminder of the divine promise that life would always be renewed after periods of darkness. Fact 58. The process of wrapping a mummified body was far more than simply covering it with cloth. It was a sacred ritual layered with magical protection at every stage. Between the long strips of linen wound around the body, priests carefully placed amulets at specific locations according to precise ritual instructions. These protective charms came in many different forms, each serving a particular purpose. Ankh symbols represented life and vitality. Eyes of Horus provided healing and protection from harm. Scarab beetles promised rebirth and renewal. Jed pillars symbolized stability and endurance. Tayet knots invoked the protection of the divine being Isis. Many of these amulets were inscribed with spells and prayers taken directly from sacred funerary texts to activate their protective power. The arrangement of amulets followed a carefully prescribed ritual order, with each charm addressing a different spiritual need. Together, they formed what might be thought of as spiritual armor, designed to safeguard the soul during its dangerous journey through the underworld and ensure safe arrival in the afterlife paradise. The hidden placement of these protective objects reminds us that mummification was never merely physical preservation. It was a comprehensive spiritual safeguarding system, carefully constructed to protect the deceased person for all eternity. Fact 59. Jewelry in ancient Egypt served purposes that went far beyond simple decoration or displays of wealth. Each piece was understood as a form of magical and spiritual expression. Every material used carried specific symbolic significance. Gold, which never tarnishes or decays, symbolized eternity and divine nature. Turquoise brought associations of joy, fertility, and life. Carnelian, with its deep red-orange color, conveyed vitality, courage, and protective power. The designs incorporated into jewelry were equally meaningful. Lotus flowers represented rebirth and emergence from darkness into light. Falcons symbolized royal power and divine kingship. Cobras offered divine protection, particularly for rulers. People at all social levels wore jewelry, though the wealthy naturally used precious metals and rare imported stones, while common people wore pieces made from faience or glazed ceramic. Jewelry accompanied its owners into death just as it had adorned them in life. Pieces were buried in tombs to continue protecting the deceased in the afterlife. The level of craftsmanship evident in surviving jewelry is remarkable, featuring intricate beadwork, delicate stone inlays, and perfectly balanced symmetry. To ancient Egyptians, a necklace or ring was never merely an accessory. It was essentially a prayer made tangible, a physical object that carried blessings and divine power with every gleam and glitter. Fact 60. Egyptian sculptors pursued a goal that went beyond creating beautiful or accurate representations. They aimed to make statues that could actually function as vessels for divine or spiritual presence. One sophisticated technique they developed to enhance realism involved creating eyes using multiple precious materials carefully assembled. Rock crystal, quartz, and obsidian were carved into separate components, representing the white of the eye, the iris, and the pupil. These pieces were set into the stone face with a white backing material, then polished until they could catch and reflect light. The result was a gaze so intense and lifelike that it seemed to follow viewers as they moved around the statue. These crafted eyes created the unsettling sensation of being watched by a conscious presence. Such statues were placed in temples, tombs, and shrines where they represented divine beings, deceased rulers, or honoured ancestors. The remarkable realism was more than artistic achievement. It served a spiritual purpose, ensuring that the essence or spirit inhabiting the statue could actually see and interact with the physical world. In many cases, the eyes received the most careful attention and finest craftsmanship of any part of the statue, embodying the belief that the gaze itself was a conduit for spiritual connection and watchful divine protection. Fact 61. Some of Egypt's most iconic and impressive monuments, including the massive colossal statues of Ramesses II, were each carved from a single enormous block of stone. These gigantic pieces often consisted of granite or sandstone and weighed hundreds of tons. The stone blocks were quarried at sites like Aswan, shaped while still partially attached to the bedrock, then somehow transported over distances of hundreds of miles. Workers used wooden sledges pulled by large teams to move these incredible weights. Archaeological evidence suggests they poured water or oil onto sand ahead of the sledges to reduce friction and make pulling easier. Carving each statue from one unbroken piece of stone gave these monuments immense structural strength, helping them survive thousands of years of weather, earthquakes, and the passage of time. The enormous size was absolutely deliberate, designed to project the pharaoh's power and establish his eternal presence through sheer, overwhelming scale. Many colossal statues were positioned at temple entrances, serving as guardians watching over sacred spaces. Even today, standing before one of these giants inspires the same sense of awe it must have created in antiquity. They remain lasting testaments to the skill, determination, and ambition of Egypt's master builders and stoneworkers. Fact 62. The Colossi of Memnon, two enormous seated statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, stand over 60 feet tall on the west bank of the Nile River. In ancient times, travellers reported an extraordinary phenomenon. At dawn, one of the statues would emit a soft musical humming sound. Greek and Roman visitors believed this was the mythical hero Memnon greeting his mother Eos, the divine personification of dawn. People travelled from distant lands specifically to hear this mysterious singing stone. Modern researchers believe the sound resulted from vibrations caused by rapid temperature changes. Cool desert nights would be followed by the intense heating of stone as the sun rose. Earthquake damage had created fine cracks inside the statue, and these cracks likely produced the musical tone as the stone expanded with the morning warmth. After Roman restoration work in the 3rd century of the Common Era, which presumably filled or sealed the cracks, the singing stopped permanently. The phenomenon had transformed these already impressive statues into famous attractions of the ancient world, drawing tourists, poets, and even emperors who wished to experience the mysterious voice. Even now, standing silent, the colossi remain imposing relics of Egyptian grandeur and testaments to the enduring fascination that this civilization has held for visitors across thousands of years. Fact 63. In the year 1259 before the Common Era, after prolonged conflict between Egypt and the Hittite Empire, Pharaoh Ramesses II and King Hattusili III signed what historians recognize as the world's first recorded peace treaty. This remarkable diplomatic document was written in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform script, ensuring both parties had versions in their own writing systems. The agreement promised mutual non-aggression, created an alliance requiring each empire to assist the other if attacked by outside forces, and established procedures for returning political refugees who fled from one kingdom to the other. Unlike many ancient truces that were temporary arrangements meant to pause hostilities until one side grew strong enough to resume fighting, this particular treaty endured for several decades. It was further strengthened when Ramesses married a Hittite princess, cementing the alliance through family connection. A copy of this ancient treaty, discovered carved on temple walls at Karnak, now hangs prominently in the United Nations headquarters in New York City, serving as a powerful symbol that diplomacy and peaceful resolution have deep roots extending back thousands of years in human history. The document demonstrates that even in an age often defined by conquest and military power, ancient civilizations recognized the practical value and moral wisdom of choosing lasting peace over endless conflict. Fact 64. Egyptian royal names were always written inside distinctive oval shapes called cartouches. These elongated ovals had a horizontal line at one end and encircled the hieroglyphic symbols spelling the ruler's name. The shape itself was highly symbolic, representing a loop of rope that magically sealed the royal name within divine protection for all eternity. The cartouche first appeared during the 4th dynasty and quickly became a standard element in hieroglyphic inscriptions, temple reliefs, and monumental carvings. Its consistent use made identifying royal names in text much easier, as they stood out visually from surrounding hieroglyphs. Pharaohs had their names carved inside cartouches on jewellery, official seals, pottery, and even their burial wrappings. The cartouche served both practical and spiritual functions. Deliberately destroying a cartouche by chiselling it out of stone was understood as a way to erase a ruler's existence from history and prevent their survival in the afterlife. This explains why some ancient monuments show names that have been intentionally defaced or removed. Conversely, inscribing a name within a cartouche was an act of immortalization, safeguarding the ruler's identity and authority in both the mortal world and the eternal divine realm that awaited after death. Fact 65. The crook and flail were two of the most iconic and immediately recognizable symbols of Egyptian kingship. These objects were often depicted crossed over the pharaoh's chest in statues and carved reliefs. Each carried distinct symbolic meaning. The crook, with its shape resembling a shepherd's staff, represented the ruler as a protective caretaker and guide for the people, watching over them as a shepherd carefully tends his flock. The flail, associated with agricultural threshing and grain separation, symbolized fertility, agricultural abundance, and the pharaoh's essential role in ensuring the land's prosperity and the people's survival. Both implements had deep connections to divine figures. The crook linked rulers to Osiris as lord of the afterlife and judge of souls. The flail connected them to the harvest and the life-sustaining power of agriculture. These symbols appeared consistently in statues, wall carvings, and royal regalia used during coronations and important ceremonies. Their presence made visible affirmation that the pharaoh governed under divine authority. To Egyptian observers, these crossed emblems were not mere decorative elements or abstract symbols. They were tangible proof that the ruler served as the earthly vessel through which cosmic order and material sustenance flowed to the people. Fact 66. Egypt's wealth and its ability to undertake massive construction projects were supported by a sophisticated tax system, administered by trained scribes and government overseers. Taxes were typically paid not in coins or currency, but in kind, meaning people paid with actual goods like grain, livestock, textiles, or labour service. Farmers owed a portion of their annual harvest to the state, and government officials travelled along the Nile to assess agricultural fields and collect what was due. The resources gathered through taxation fed workers on state building projects, maintained temple operations, and supported the standing army. Records of tax assessments and payments were meticulously kept on papyrus scrolls and pottery fragments, demonstrating the remarkable administrative sophistication underlying Egyptian civilization. People who failed to meet their tax obligations faced serious consequences, including fines, confiscation of property, or forced labour assignments. The tax system also extended to goods brought into Egypt through international trade, ensuring the government profited from Egypt's strategic position as a commercial hub connecting Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean world. This extensive network of collection, recording, and distribution was one of the fundamental pillars supporting Egypt's stability and prosperity, providing the economic foundation that funded both the grandeur of monuments and the everyday operations of government for century after century. Fact 67. The Great Pyramids were not constructed by slaves as was once commonly believed. Modern archaeological evidence has conclusively demonstrated they were built by skilled labourers who were organised into rotating work crews. These workers were compensated for their service, though not with money. Instead, they received payment in essential provisions, primarily bread and beer. A typical daily allowance for a pyramid worker might include several substantial loaves of bread and multiple measures of thick, grain-rich beer that provided both nutrition and hydration during long days of physical labour under the intense desert sun. This payment system in food and drink ensured the workforce remained strong, healthy and motivated, while also eliminating the need for a formal currency system. Bread and beer were the fundamental staples of Egyptian diet at all social levels, so wages paid in these items directly met workers' basic survival needs. Archaeological excavations of workers' villages near the Giza Pyramid complex have revealed bakeries and breweries operating on industrial scales, producing thousands of loaves and enormous quantities of beer every single day. This massive food production infrastructure demonstrates both the scale of the pyramid projects and the organisational sophistication required to feed the thousands of workers involved. The system shows that these impressive architectural achievements were supported by equally impressive logistical planning. Fact 68. Archaeologists have uncovered entire purpose-built settlements that housed the labourers who constructed royal tombs and worked on monumental building projects. One of the best-preserved examples is Deir el-Medina, which was home to the skilled artisans who built and decorated the elaborate tombs in the Valley of the Kings. This village's stone houses, narrow winding streets, and communal gathering spaces remain remarkably intact after thousands of years, offering modern researchers a rare and detailed glimpse into the daily lives of working people in ancient Egypt. These residential structures contained multiple rooms for different purposes, storage spaces for food and possessions, and even remnants of painted wall decorations that personalized living spaces. Inscriptions and written documents found at the site reveal fascinating details about wage payments, work schedules, occasional labor strikes, and personal relationships among community members. These villages were far from crude temporary camps. They were well-planned, relatively comfortable communities with clear social structures, local governance, religious practices, and a genuine sense of permanence and stability. The excellent preservation of sites like Deir el-Medina allows historians to understand how Egypt's spectacular monumental achievements were supported by organized, well-supplied workforces living in purpose-built settlements strategically located near major construction sites. Fact 69. Egyptian artists did not primarily aim for naturalistic realism as we might expect from art today. Instead, they followed strict stylistic conventions specifically designed to convey symbolic order and clear meaning rather than visual accuracy. Artists often worked using a grid system where each part of the human body was assigned a specific proportional unit. This ensured remarkable consistency across different artworks, created over centuries and even millennia. The conventions also dictated that more important figures like pharaohs and divine beings would be shown physically larger than other people, regardless of their actual relative sizes. This artistic choice reinforced social hierarchy and spiritual importance through visual scale. These unchanging rules were deeply connected to Egyptian concepts of cosmic order and religious truth. Art was never understood as mere decoration or creative self-expression. It was a powerful means of preserving eternal truth and maintaining cosmic balance. By rigidly adhering to these established rules generation after generation, Egyptian artists created a remarkably consistent and immediately recognizable visual language that has endured as one of the most distinctive artistic styles in all of human history. The style's stability across thousands of years reflects the civilization's deep commitment to maintaining traditional order and their belief that certain forms of expression were not meant to change but to remain eternally constant. Fact 70. One of the most distinctive and immediately recognizable features of Egyptian artistic style is the composite view used to depict human faces and bodies. Heads and faces are consistently shown in profile view to capture the most recognizable and characteristic outline. However, the eye is always depicted as if viewed from the front, appearing large and almond-shaped rather than in profile. Shoulders also face forward toward the viewer, yet legs and feet return to profile view, showing both legs clearly separated. This unusual combination was absolutely intentional, not an error or lack of technical skill. The composite view prioritized completeness and clarity over realistic perspective. Artists wanted to show each body part from the angle that presented it most completely and recognizably. This approach extended beyond human figures to depictions of animals and divine beings as well. The goal was ensuring every important element could be instantly identified and read by anyone viewing the artwork. For ancient Egyptians, this distinctive style served as a form of visual preservation. By showing each person, or being in this complete composite manner, artists believed they were capturing and preserving the eternal essence of that individual in the most powerful way possible. These images carried genuine power, especially when carved or painted in tombs, where they were meant to sustain the deceased person's existence throughout eternity. Fact 71. The temple reliefs and painted walls we see today in ancient Egyptian structures appear as bare weathered stone in various earth tones. However, when these monuments were first completed, they looked completely different. Walls were originally painted in vivid, bright colours, including brilliant reds, deep blues, vibrant greens, and gleaming golds that made carved scenes appear dramatically alive and almost three-dimensional. Over thousands of years, these painted surfaces gradually faded, flaked away, or were deliberately removed, leaving behind the neutral stone we observe today. Interestingly, these reliefs were sometimes repainted during ancient times, either to restore colours that had faded or to update the imagery for political or religious reasons. A new pharaoh ascending to power might order his workers to replace the carved names or faces of previous rulers with his own, effectively rewriting history on temple walls and reasserting his own legacy in sacred spaces. In other historical periods, major religious shifts led to changes in which divine beings were prominently depicted, with certain figures being added to temple walls while others were removed or covered over. Modern scientific analysis of paint layers discovered on temple walls reveals this fascinating evolving history, demonstrating that temples functioned as dynamic, living spaces rather than static, unchanging monuments. The practice of repainting reflects the Egyptian desire to keep sacred art vibrant, relevant, and properly aligned with current political and religious realities. Fact 72. The Nile Delta region was once home to flourishing cities, busy ports, and magnificent temples. However, many of these important settlements now lie completely buried beneath thick layers of silt and accumulated sediment. Over thousands of years, changes in the river's course combined with gradually rising water levels caused these urban centres to be submerged and forgotten. Modern archaeologists using sophisticated technologies, including ground-penetrating radar and underwater exploration techniques, have begun locating and studying these lost cities. Two particularly significant examples are Heracleion and Canopus, which sank beneath the Mediterranean Sea where the Nile Delta meets the ocean. Preserved beneath mud and water, artifacts recovered from these submerged sites remain in remarkably good condition. Items ranging from monumental statues to everyday household tools have been carefully retrieved. Their discovery provides valuable new insights into Egypt's extensive trade networks, evolving religious practices over time, and cultural connections with the wider ancient Mediterranean world. These hidden underwater cities remind us that substantial portions of Egyptian history remain literally beneath the surface of rivers, lakes, and coastal waters. Despite centuries of dedicated archaeological exploration, much still waits to be properly documented and understood. The ongoing work to locate and study these submerged settlements continues to reshape and expand our understanding of ancient Egyptian civilization. Fact 73. When the massive Aswan High Dam was constructed during the 1960s, the creation of Lake Nasser behind the dam caused rising waters to submerge vast stretches of southern Egypt and northern Sudan. This enormous artificial lake flooded ancient temples, tombs, burial grounds, and entire settlements. Some critically important monuments, including the famous temples at Abu Simbel, were painstakingly relocated to higher ground through an impressive international effort. Engineers cut these structures into massive blocks, moved them piece by piece, and reassembled them above the new waterline. However, many other archaeological sites could not be saved and were left behind beneath the rising lake. These submerged structures, tombs, and artifacts remain preserved in the silt and water at the lake bottom, protected from weathering and looting but largely inaccessible to researchers. The underwater environment has created what are essentially time capsules of ancient life, with contents potentially as well preserved as materials found in the driest desert tombs. Occasionally, severe droughts lower the lake level enough to temporarily expose some of these flooded sites, and specialized diving expeditions sometimes explore the submerged ruins. However, the vast majority of what lies beneath Lake Nasser remains hidden and unexplored. These drowned treasures serve as a sobering reminder of the trade-offs made in the name of modern development, and the enduring mysteries that remain scattered throughout Egypt. Fact 74. The skill and expertise of ancient Egyptian embalmers reached such advanced levels that some mummified bodies have survived in truly remarkable condition for more than 3,000 years. Preserved skin, hair, and even tattoos remain clearly visible on certain mummies, offering modern researchers unprecedented opportunities to study the physical characteristics, health conditions, and lives of ancient people. Modern forensic analysis reveals that the combination of careful organ removal, thorough drying using natron salt, and treatment with preservative resins created an environment that actively prevented decay. In certain exceptional cases, preservation is so complete that facial features and expressions remain discernible, old injuries are still visible, and even evidence of diseases can be detected and studied. This level of preservation was simultaneously a practical achievement demonstrating advanced technical knowledge and a spiritual accomplishment reflecting deep religious beliefs. Embalmers succeeded in their primary goal of ensuring the physical body remained a viable vessel for the soul's return in the afterlife. The extraordinary fact that some ancient Egyptian mummies have been preserved better than bodies treated with modern embalming techniques speaks powerfully to the sophistication, precision, and effectiveness of funerary sciences practiced along the Nile thousands of years ago. Fact 75. Ancient Egyptian embalmers incorporated a remarkable variety of materials into their preservation processes, many of which came from distant foreign lands. Resins extracted from conifer trees, bitumen brought from the Dead Sea region, aromatic myrrh from the land of Punt, and fragrant cedar oil imported from Lebanon were among the most highly valued ingredients. These exotic substances were prized not only for their practical preservative properties, but also for their pleasant fragrances, which masked the unpleasant odours associated with death and decay. Additionally, these imported materials carried religious and spiritual significance, connecting the deceased person to distant lands and sacred substances. The procurement of such costly materials from far beyond Egypt's borders reveals the existence of extensive trade networks reaching across the ancient world. Chemical analysis of mummy wrappings and preserved tissue has confirmed these exotic origins, demonstrating that mummification was simultaneously a spiritual ritual and a major international commercial enterprise. Multiple industries and professions were involved in the process, from traders who imported rare resins to embalmers who prepared bodies to priests who performed accompanying rituals. The willingness to use rare and expensive imported materials in mummification reflects the extraordinary importance ancient Egyptians placed on proper preservation of the physical body, considering no cost too great and no distance too far if it meant ensuring eternal survival in the afterlife. Fact 76. During the mummification process, 4 essential internal organs were carefully removed from the body, treated with preservatives, and placed in special containers called canopic jars. These 4 organs were the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Each jar was placed under the protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus, divine beings who safeguarded these vital body parts for the afterlife. The lids of canopic jars were carved to represent these protective figures, appearing as human, jackal, baboon, and falcon heads. These guardians ensured the organs would remain safe throughout eternity, and would be available when needed again in the afterlife. The heart, which was considered the most important organ, was typically left inside the body, or replaced with a special protective charm if it was accidentally damaged during the embalming process. The brain, as we discussed earlier, was removed and discarded as useless. Canopic jars were crafted from various materials ranging from simple limestone to precious alabaster, often beautifully carved and inscribed with protective spells taken from sacred texts. These jars were placed alongside the mummy in the burial chamber, forming an integral part of the journey toward eternal existence. They embodied the Egyptian belief that the complete physical body, with all its parts properly protected and preserved, was absolutely essential for continued life in the world beyond death. Fact 77. The constant threat of tomb robbery led some pharaohs to devise elaborate strategies to conceal and protect their final resting places. Hidden entrances were carefully disguised to blend with surrounding rock faces. False corridors were constructed to mislead thieves into dead ends far from the actual burial chamber. Misleading inscriptions were carved to confuse anyone who managed to penetrate the outer defences. In some instances, the precise location of a tomb was kept absolutely secret, known only to a trusted few. Tombs were built in remote valleys, far from populated areas and visible temple complexes, where natural terrain provided additional protection. The Valley of the Kings became a preferred burial location, partly because its steep surrounding cliffs and winding access paths offered natural defensive advantages that made unauthorized entry more difficult. Some tomb construction projects were deliberately started in one location and then abandoned if there were any suspicions that the secrecy had been compromised with work secretly beginning elsewhere. Despite all these creative efforts and precautions, very few royal tombs escaped looting entirely. The tremendous drive to hide and protect a pharaoh's resting place reveals both the staggering value of treasures buried within and the profound fear that violating a tomb could endanger the ruler's soul in the afterlife, a risk that no pharaoh could accept. Fact 78. The Valley of the Kings, located in the cliffs on the western bank of the Nile near modern Luxor, served as the royal burial ground for nearly 5 centuries during what historians call the New Kingdom period. More than 60 tombs have been discovered carved into the rocky valley walls, ranging from simple unfinished pits to elaborate multi-chambered corridors that extend deep into the mountainside. These tombs were carefully designed to serve dual purposes. They protected the mummified pharaohs and their valuable burial goods from thieves while also symbolically guiding the deceased ruler through the dangerous journey through the underworld toward eternal life. Interior walls are covered with intricate painted scenes taken from sacred religious texts including the Book of the Dead, showing divine beings, protective spells written in hieroglyphs, and detailed illustrations of the pharaoh's expected journey toward eternal existence. Many tombs can be connected to specific famous rulers, including Rameses II, Seti I, and the young pharaoh Tutankhamun. While most burial chambers were stripped of their treasures by robbers in ancient times, the stunning artwork and impressive architecture remain intact, representing some of the finest craftsmanship in all of Egypt. The valley continues to yield new discoveries even today, reminding researchers that even after more than 2 centuries of intensive archaeological exploration, Egyptian secrets are far from completely revealed. Fact 79. When British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, he made a discovery that would capture worldwide imagination and transform our understanding of Egyptian burial practices. The tomb contained more than 5,000 individual objects packed into its relatively small chambers. The incredible array included golden shrines that had protected the mummy, elaborately decorated chariots, royal clothing and sandals, weapons and hunting equipment, jewellery of extraordinary craftsmanship, statues of the young king and various divine beings, and numerous everyday items meant to serve the ruler in his afterlife existence. Many objects were crafted with astonishing detail and artistry, combining precious gold with inlays of semi-precious stones and featuring intricate carved decorations. The remarkable variety of items reflected the fundamental Egyptian belief that life continued after death, in a form very similar to earthly existence, requiring both luxury goods and practical everyday objects. Even mundane items like sealed jars of honey and bundles of linen garments were included because they might be needed. Because Tutankhamun's tomb was quite small compared to those built for more powerful pharaohs, all these thousands of objects were packed tightly together, creating the sensation of stepping into an incredibly wealthy storage room frozen in time. This unprecedented discovery gave the modern world its most complete and detailed glimpse into the burial customs and material culture of Egypt's ruling class. Fact 80. The burial mask of Tutankhamun stands as one of the most iconic and instantly recognizable artifacts from the ancient world. This masterpiece of craftsmanship was constructed from more than 20 pounds of solid gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan, quartz and coloured glass, to create the distinctive striped headdress and facial features. The mask portrays the young pharaoh's face in an idealized, eternally youthful manner with serene expression and perfectly balanced features. It was designed to serve multiple purposes simultaneously. It honored and preserved the ruler's image for eternity, while also functioning as a magical protective device for his journey through the dangers of the underworld. Hieroglyphic inscriptions covering the back and shoulders of the mask include protective spells taken directly from the Book of the Dead, sacred texts meant to ensure the king's safety and guarantee his eternal survival. The construction reveals the extraordinary sophistication of Egyptian goldsmiths who could shape and join precious metals with flawless precision, creating seams so perfect they are nearly invisible. When Howard Carter first carefully lifted this mask from the mummy beneath it, he was looking at a piece of artwork that had not been touched or seen by human eyes for more than 3,000 years. Represented a direct, glittering connection spanning the vast gulf of time between our modern world and ancient Egypt's vision of eternal life and immortality. Fact 81. After the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, dramatic rumours began spreading that those who entered the burial chamber were struck by a deadly curse. The sudden death of Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy British aristocrat who had financed the excavation, seemed to confirm these supernatural fears. Newspapers eagerly reported any illness, accident, or misfortune experienced by anyone connected to the excavation team, suggesting these events proved the existence of supernatural revenge for disturbing the young king's eternal rest. However, examining the actual facts tells a very different story. Most people who were present at the tomb's opening lived long, healthy lives with no unusual health problems. Howard Carter himself, who spent more time in the tomb than anyone else, survived for many years after the discovery and died of natural causes at age 64. Modern scholars believe the curse was largely a combination of unfortunate coincidence, sensationalist media reporting designed to sell newspapers, and possibly exposure to harmful bacteria or mold that had accumulated within the sealed tomb over millennia. The persistent myth continues to fascinate people, because it connects to timeless themes about respecting the dead, and the idea that some ancient secrets perhaps should remain untouched. The story also reflects humanity's enduring fascination with Egyptian mysteries, and our desire to believe that the ancient world possessed knowledge and powers we cannot fully understand. Fact 82. Animal mummification was practiced throughout ancient Egypt on a truly massive scale, serving various religious and symbolic purposes. Cats, ibises, crocodiles, bulls, falcons, and countless other species were carefully embalmed using processes similar to those used for humans. Some mummified animals were beloved household pets being buried alongside their owners to provide companionship in the afterlife. Others were ritually bred and raised specifically for religious sacrifice at temples dedicated to the divine beings they represented. Temples sold mummified animals to pilgrims who would purchase them as offerings to present to specific divine powers, hoping to gain favour or assistance. The mummification process for animals mirrored human practices, involving careful drying with natron salt, wrapping in linen strips, and placement in decorated coffins or pottery containers. Vast animal burial grounds, called necropolises, have been discovered containing thousands and even millions of carefully preserved creatures. These enormous underground chambers filled with mummified animals reveal the incredible scale of this religious practice and demonstrate how deeply animal worship was woven into the fabric of Egyptian spiritual life. The sheer numbers involved suggest this was a significant religious, industry-employing breeders, embalmers, priests, and craftsmen who created the containers and wrappings. Fact 83. Archaeological excavations across Egypt have revealed burial grounds on a scale that defies easy comprehension. At Saqqara and other major sites, underground passages called catacombs extend for enormous distances, containing literally millions of mummified animals. Countless ibises representing the divine being Thoth, falcons associated with Horus, and dogs connected to Anubis have been discovered carefully wrapped and placed in pottery jars or wooden boxes. Some animal mummies were prepared with great care and expense, using fine-quality linen and expensive resins, while others appear to have been prepared more hastily, likely to meet the high demand from pilgrims seeking affordable offerings. This variation in quality suggests a large-scale religious economy, operating at multiple price points to serve worshippers of different economic means. The existence of these massive animal burial sites highlights several important aspects of Egyptian culture. First, it demonstrates the genuine depth of animal worship and the belief that animals could serve as direct representatives of divine powers. Second, it reveals sophisticated animal husbandry practices and extensive trade networks necessary to supply the constant demand for creatures to be mummified. Finally, it provides modern scientists with valuable information about ancient animal breeding, diet, diseases, and the environmental conditions that existed in Egypt thousands of years ago. Fact 84. The Apis bull held a position of extraordinary importance in Egyptian religious life. This sacred animal was considered a living manifestation of the divine being Ptah, and later became associated with Osiris as well. Each Apis bull was selected based on very specific physical markings, including particular patterns of black and white coloration. Once identified and confirmed by priests, the chosen bull lived a pampered existence in the city of Memphis, housed in special quarters attached to the temple and tended by devoted priests. The bull received the finest food, was adorned with jewelry and decorative coverings, and was treated with the reverence appropriate for a living divine presence. When an Apis bull died, whether from natural causes or ritual sacrifice, it received an elaborate funeral with full mummification. At Saqqara, a vast underground complex called the Serapeum was constructed specifically to house the enormous stone sarcophagi built for these sacred bulls. These burial containers were carved from solid granite, with some weighing over 70 tons, demonstrating the tremendous effort and resources devoted to properly honouring these animals. The massive scale of these burials, comparable to royal human burials, underscores the genuinely elevated status the Apis bulls held in Egyptian society and religious practice. They were understood not as mere symbols but as actual divine beings walking the earth in animal form. Fact 85. At the peak of its power and influence, ancient Egypt controlled territories extending far beyond the Nile Valley heartland. Pharaohs of the New Kingdom period ruled lands stretching into what we now call Sudan to the south, and reaching north and east into areas that today comprise Israel, Lebanon, and Syria. These military conquests and territorial expansions brought tremendous wealth flowing into Egypt from subject territories. Gold mines in Nubia provided the precious metal that funded monumental construction projects. Cedar wood from the forests of Lebanon supplied timber for ships, furniture, and building. Tribute payments from vassal city-states added to Egypt's prosperity. Egyptian power was maintained through a combination of military garrisons stationed in key locations, fortresses built at strategic points along borders and trade routes, and political alliances cemented through diplomatic marriages between pharaohs and daughters of foreign rulers. This expansion did not simply enrich Egypt materially, it also facilitated tremendous cultural exchange that flowed in both directions. Egyptian art, architectural styles, religious concepts, and hieroglyphic writing spread throughout the Near East, while foreign deities, artistic motifs, luxury goods, and cultural practices flowed back into Egypt, creating a dynamic interchange that transformed and enriched the civilization. Fact 86. Egypt's territorial reach extended particularly far in two directions. To the south, Egyptian control pushed deep into Nubia, the region we now call Sudan. This southern expansion was driven primarily by strategic and economic considerations. The Nubian territories contained rich gold deposits that were absolutely vital to Egypt's economy and prestige. Egyptian rulers established substantial fortresses along the Nile River in Nubia, built temples proclaiming their authority, and integrated the region into Egypt's administrative system. To the northeast, Egyptian influence reached into the Levant, the coastal region bordering the eastern Mediterranean Sea. This area held strategic importance for controlling trade routes and provided access to valuable resources unavailable in Egypt itself. Cities and ports along the coast came under Egyptian dominance through military campaigns and diplomatic pressure. These territories were not simply conquered and exploited. Evidence shows genuine integration into the broader Egyptian sphere, with Egyptian architectural styles appearing in local construction, Egyptian administrative systems being implemented, and local rulers adopting Egyptian titles and customs. Archaeological artifacts from these regions demonstrate fascinating blending of Egyptian and indigenous styles, illustrating how far Egyptian cultural influence spread and how the civilization absorbed and adapted foreign elements in return. This extensive imperial reach helped secure Egypt's prosperity and dominant position for many centuries. Fact 87. Lapis lazuli, a semi-precious stone prized for its deep blue colour, naturally flecked with golden pyrite inclusions, was among the most valued materials in ancient Egypt. This striking stone carried one significant problem for Egyptian craftsmen. It was not found anywhere in Egypt or even in nearby regions. The nearest sources were located in what is now Afghanistan, more than 2,000 miles distant. This meant lapis lazuli had to travel along extensive trade networks passing through Mesopotamia and the Levant before finally reaching Egyptian workshops. Despite the enormous distances involved and the resulting high cost, lapis lazuli appears throughout Egyptian art and burial goods. It was carefully carved into amulets worn for protection, inlaid into jewellery alongside gold and other precious materials, and even ground into fine powder for use in cosmetics and pigments for painting. The stone's rich blue colour held deep symbolic meaning, representing the heavens and conveying divine protection to whoever wore or possessed it. This made lapis lazuli particularly favoured for sacred objects and royal adornments. The presence of this distant stone in tombs, including that of Tutankhamun, reveals both Egypt's far-reaching trade connections and the immense value placed on materials imbued with symbolic spiritual power. The journey of lapis lazuli from Afghan mountains to the banks of the Nile speaks eloquently to the interconnectedness of the ancient world, long before modern transportation and communication made such distances seem trivial. Fact 88. Incense played an absolutely vital role in Egyptian religious practice. The fragrant smoke rising from burning resins was believed to carry prayers upward to divine powers, while simultaneously purifying temple spaces and making them suitable for sacred rituals. The most highly treasured incense resins, frankincense and myrrh, did not grow in Egypt. They came from a distant region the Egyptians called Punt, identified by most scholars as located somewhere along the Red Sea coast or the Horn of Africa, in what might now be Somalia, Eritrea, or eastern Sudan. Punt was celebrated in Egyptian texts and temple carvings as a legendary land of abundance, famed not only for its aromatic trees but also for gold, ivory, ebony wood, and exotic animals. Egyptian expeditions to Punt are depicted in remarkable detail on temple walls, most famously at Queen Hatshepsut's mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. These carved reliefs show Egyptian ships being loaded with goods and even illustrate living incense trees being carefully transported back to Egypt for planting. These precious fragrant imports were considered offerings worthy of divine beings themselves, burned daily in temples throughout Egypt. The connection to Punt represented more than simple trade. It symbolized a link to a distant land of divine favor and natural wealth. The scent of frankincense and myrrh filling Egyptian temples carried not just pleasant fragrance, but the essence of a mysterious land blessed with abundance. Fact 89. Despite remarkably detailed ancient records describing expeditions to Punt and carefully carved temple reliefs showing its landscape, people and products, the precise geographical location of this important trading partner remains one of Egyptian archaeology's enduring mysteries. Ancient texts clearly describe Punt as a land rich in incense, gold, ebony, and exotic wildlife that was reached by sailing along the Red Sea coast. Most modern scholars believe it was located in the Horn of Africa region, possibly in modern Eritrea, Somalia, or the Sudanese coast. However, some researchers suggest it might have been further south along the African coast, while others propose locations across the Red Sea on the Arabian Peninsula. Temple reliefs from Hatshepsut's reign provide tantalizing visual clues, depicting Punt's inhabitants, distinctive houses built on stilts above the ground, and lush vegetation. Yet despite these detailed descriptions, no definitive archaeological site has been conclusively identified as ancient Punt. The land occupied a nearly mythical place in the Egyptian imagination, celebrated as a source of divine blessings and precious goods. The fact that its location remains unknown despite extensive research adds another layer to Egypt's enduring mysteries, reminding us that substantial gaps still exist in our knowledge of the ancient world, even regarding places that were clearly important and frequently visited in antiquity. Fact 90. To reach distant trading partners like Punt, Egyptians constructed sturdy seafaring vessels capable of navigating the challenging conditions of the Red Sea, with its strong winds, dangerous reefs, and unpredictable currents. These ships represented significant advances in Egyptian boat-building technology. They were often made from cedar wood imported from Lebanon, chosen for its strength and resistance to water damage. Rather than using metal nails or pegs, shipbuilders lashed planks together with ropes made from plant fibers, creating flexible hulls that could withstand the stresses of ocean waves. Temple reliefs depict these vessels with large crews of rowers working alongside square sails that could capture favourable winds. The ships had substantial cargo holds, designed to transport heavy loads of trade goods safely across hundreds of miles of open water. These expeditions required careful advance planning, because voyages could last for months, and success depended on seasonal wind patterns. Archaeological sites like Mersag Oasis on the Red Sea coast have yielded remarkable physical evidence, including preserved ship timbers, coiled ropes, wooden cargo boxes, and even ancient anchors. These tangible remains offer rare direct proof of Egypt's maritime capabilities and ambitions. The expeditions brought back incense, exotic animals, gold, and other treasures that enriched Egypt's economy and enhanced Pharaoh's prestige. They also demonstrate the Egyptians' advanced shipbuilding skills and their willingness to venture far beyond the familiar safety of the Nile River to expand trade networks and influence across distant seas. Fact 91. The horse-drawn chariot, introduced to Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period, likely by the Hyksos people who ruled parts of Egypt during that era, completely revolutionized Egyptian military tactics and capabilities. These vehicles were remarkably light, fast, and highly maneuverable, constructed primarily from bent wood with leather components. Chariots allowed skilled archers to fire arrows from a moving platform, dramatically increasing both their effective range and their tactical flexibility on the battlefield. By the New Kingdom period, chariots had evolved beyond purely military tools to become powerful symbols of royal authority and divine power. Pharaohs like Ramesses II are frequently depicted in temple carvings and paintings leading dramatic chariot charges, bow drawn and ready, with enemies falling beneath the wheels of their vehicles. Operating a chariot effectively required considerable skill and teamwork. Each chariot carried 2 men, a driver who controlled the horses and maneuvered the vehicle, and an archer who focused on combat. These vehicles were expensive to construct and maintain, requiring specialized craftsmen, quality materials, and trained horses. This made chariot units elite forces within the Egyptian army, often comprising nobles and professional soldiers rather than common conscripts. The arrival of chariot technology marked Egypt's transition toward more mobile and aggressive military strategies, allowing Egyptian forces to project power more effectively across greater distances and to respond more quickly to threats or opportunities. Fact 92. While many pharaohs delegated military command to professional generals and relied on their expertise, several rulers personally led their armies in the field, taking direct command during campaigns. Thutmose III, who ruled during the New Kingdom, is sometimes called Egypt's Napoleon due to his extraordinary military achievements. He personally led numerous campaigns into the Levant and Nubia, expanding Egyptian territory to its greatest historical extent through a combination of brilliant strategy and aggressive action. Ramesses II famously participated directly in the Battle of Kadesh, one of the largest chariot battles in ancient history. Temple inscriptions describe him personally directing chariot charges and fighting surrounded by enemies despite the chaos and danger. Such personal leadership served purposes beyond purely military necessity. It powerfully reinforced the pharaoh's divinely appointed role as Egypt's protector, demonstrating that he was not merely an administrator, but a warrior chosen by divine powers to defend the land. Victories were prominently recorded on temple walls in detailed reliefs and lengthy inscriptions, blending historical fact with propaganda to ensure the pharaoh's martial reputation endured forever. Whether these accounts are completely accurate or somewhat idealized, they present the ruler as simultaneously king and general, master of both statecraft and battlefield strategy, fulfilling his sacred duty to protect Egypt through personal courage and military skill. Fact 93. Egyptian rulers commemorated their military victories by erecting monumental stone slabs called steadily, which were covered with detailed inscriptions describing battles and conquests. These records frequently exaggerated the scale of victories and presented the pharaoh as an invincible force blessed by divine favor. The Battle of Kadesh between Egypt and the Hittite Empire provides a perfect example. This battle, which historians believe actually ended in something close to a stalemate, is recorded in multiple Egyptian temples with nearly identical inscriptions. These texts portray Ramesses II as a hero who single-handedly turned the tide of battle when his army faltered, personally defeating thousands of enemies through divine intervention and personal prowess. Such stele served multiple overlapping purposes. They functioned as propaganda aimed at Egyptian subjects and foreign rivals, demonstrating the pharaoh's power and divine support. They served as religious offerings, crediting divine assistance for military success. They were placed prominently in temple courtyards and public spaces, where they inspired loyalty among Egyptians, intimidated potential enemies, and immortalized the pharaoh's reputation for future generations. Even when historical accuracy is questionable, These victory inscriptions provide invaluable insights into how Egyptians conceptualized warfare, how they understood the relationship between human rulers and divine powers, and how they believed success in battle depended on maintaining proper religious observance alongside military capability. Fact 94. From the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3,100 years before the Common Era to the Roman conquest in 30 years before the Common Era, ancient Egypt maintained its existence as a distinct and influential civilization for more than 3,000 years. This extraordinary longevity is virtually unmatched among ancient societies. Over this vast time span, Egyptian art styles, architectural approaches, religious beliefs, and political structures certainly evolved and changed, yet they retained recognizable core characteristics that connected the civilization across millennia. Egypt's remarkable stability enabled continuous cultural development over dozens of generations. Its monuments inspired admiration and imitation among later civilizations from ancient Greece to the Islamic world. Its religious concepts influenced spiritual beliefs throughout neighboring regions. The civilization's ability to endure for such an enormous span of time testifies to its successful adaptation to changing circumstances, while simultaneously preserving cherished traditions and maintaining cultural continuity. Egypt developed resilient systems of government, sustainable agricultural practices based on the annual Nile flood, and social structures that proved remarkably durable. The sheer length of Egyptian civilization means that Cleopatra, who lived in the 1st century before the Common Era, was actually closer in time to us today than she was to the builders of the Great Pyramid, a fact that helps illustrate just how vast and ancient this civilization truly was. Fact 95. Ancient Egypt was conquered and ruled by foreign powers on multiple occasions throughout its long history. Nubians from the south, Assyrians from Mesopotamia, Persians from the east, Greeks following Alexander the Great's conquests, and finally Romans all took control of Egypt at various periods. Yet remarkably, each group of new rulers eventually adopted significant elements of Egyptian culture rather than completely replacing it with their own traditions. Foreign kings commissioned artists to depict them wearing traditional Egyptian royal regalia and assuming classic pharaonic poses. They built and restored temples dedicated to traditional Egyptian divine beings. They participated in ancient religious ceremonies and presented themselves as legitimate successors to the long line of native pharaohs. The Ptolemaic dynasty, despite being Greek Macedonian in origin and maintaining Greek language and customs at court, gradually incorporated more Egyptian traditions over their 3-century rule. Roman emperors, even after Egypt became a province of their vast empire, continued funding temple construction and restoration projects for centuries. This remarkable cultural resilience ensured that even when Egypt lost political independence, it retained its spiritual and artistic distinctiveness. The civilization's cultural influence on its conquerors was often as significant as the conqueror's influence on Egypt, creating a fascinating two-way exchange that enriched both sides. Fact 96. The monuments of ancient Egypt, from the towering pyramids at Giza to the sprawling temple complexes at Karnak and Luxor, have endured across thousands of years through wars, earthquakes, floods, changing climates, and the simple passage of enormous spans of time. These structures were deliberately built to honor divine powers and commemorate rulers, but more fundamentally, they were designed with eternity specifically in mind. Massive stone blocks were cut, transported, and fitted together so precisely that many still stand firmly despite all the challenges time has thrown at them. Some blocks fit together so tightly that even today a thin knife blade cannot be inserted between them. Hieroglyphic inscriptions carved deeply into stone walls continue to tell their stories across millennia, as readable now as when they were first carved by ancient craftsmen. These monuments transcend being merely ancient relics or tourist attractions. They function as living connections to a civilization that successfully achieved its goal of immortality through stone and story. They allow us to stand in spaces that were sacred thousands of years ago and to read words written by people separated from us by immense gulfs of time. To physically stand before these structures is to feel the accumulated weight of ages and to understand viscerally why Egypt's legacy remains among the most powerful and inspiring in all of human history. Fact 97. Our journey through the wonders and mysteries of ancient Egypt drifts now toward its gentle conclusion. We have walked together among temple columns that rose like forests of carved stone reaching toward the sky. We have traced the elegant curves of hieroglyphs carved thousands of years ago by craftsmen whose names we will never know. We have stood beside the silent, weathered faces of colossal statues who have gazed steadily across the desert for more centuries than we can easily comprehend. We have heard the whisper of sand-laden winds brushing against pyramid walls that have stood since the very dawn of recorded history. We have felt the echo of countless footsteps in torchlit tombs, where rulers still lie wrapped in linen and surrounded by the treasures they hoped would serve them throughout eternity. Egypt's extraordinary story encompasses far more than gleaming gold and towering monuments, though these certainly capture our imagination. At its heart, this is a story about people. Dedicated scribes bending over papyrus scrolls by flickering oil lamplight, carefully recording the details of daily life and sacred knowledge. Skilled artisans patiently shaping crystal eyes for statues of divine beings, knowing their work would outlast them by millennia. Boat crews steering cargo vessels laden with grain and trade goods up the slow, green meandering course of the Nile, the river that made all life possible in the desert. This is the story of a civilization that reached boldly toward eternal existence and in so many remarkable ways actually achieved it. Fact 98. Now, as imaginary desert sands settle around us and the last golden light fades behind distant hills on the western horizon, let your thoughts drift peacefully like a small boat floating on the Nile at dusk. The world grows quiet and still. Stars begin appearing one by one overhead in the darkening sky. The urgent voices of the present day grow softer and more distant. The monuments we have visited together dissolve gradually into purple shadow. Time itself seems to slow its relentless march, becoming something more fluid and dreamlike. The ancient Egyptians understood something profound about the nature of existence and memory. They knew that what we build with intention and care, what we record in lasting materials, what we invest with meaning and purpose, these things can endure far beyond our individual lifetimes. They can speak across the vast silence of centuries, connecting us to people we never met, allowing their dreams and achievements to live on in our minds and hearts. If your eyes are growing heavy now, if sleep is approaching on the soft and quiet feet, you may rest here peacefully. You can carry with you the knowledge that Egypt endures, not just in weathered stone and faded paintings, but in memory itself, in the still places of the human mind where history transforms gradually into dream, and where the past becomes somehow eternally present. Fact 99. When you eventually wake, whether that is in a few minutes or many hours from now, the wonders of the ancient world will still be waiting patiently for you. The pyramids will still stand on their desert plateau, catching the first rays of dawn just as they have for more than 4,000 years. The Sphinx will still gaze eternally eastward toward the rising sun, keeping its mysterious vigil. Temple columns will still reach skyward, their carved surfaces telling stories in a language we have learned to read again after centuries of silence. The Nile will still flow northward toward the Mediterranean, just as it has flowed since long before humans walked its banks, carrying the gift of water and life through an otherwise barren landscape. These physical monuments endure, but perhaps more importantly, the ideas and achievements of ancient Egypt endure as well. Their understanding of the cosmos, their artistic vision, their architectural innovations, their written language, their medical knowledge, and their profound contemplation of death and eternity all continue to influence and inspire us. We are connected to them through an unbroken chain of human curiosity and wonder that spans the millennia. Fact 100. If you find yourself still awake, still travelling with me through this quiet exploration of the past, you are welcome to join me again in the next video where another story will unfold. Perhaps we will explore different ancient civilizations, or journey through distant reaches of space, or examine the hidden wonders of the natural world, or investigate the frontiers of scientific understanding. Whatever topic we choose, it will be presented in this same gentle manner, with the same calm pacing, allowing information to wash over you like waves lapping softly at a shore. Knowledge and relaxation need not be opposed to each other. Learning can be a peaceful experience, especially when approached with patience and presented with care. For now, though, let yourself rest if rest is what you need. Let the weight of daily concerns slip away like sand running through open fingers. Let your breathing slow to match the timeless rhythm of the desert wind. Let your consciousness drift into whatever state feels most natural and comfortable. Sleep well, peaceful traveller through time and space. May your dreams be as vast as the Egyptian sky, as enduring as stone monuments, and as filled with wonder as the golden treasures hidden in ancient tombs. Thank you for spending this time exploring ancient Egypt together. Until we meet again in another video on another journey, rest well beneath the stars.